Welcome to the School of Love, the place where miracles are normal. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the School of Love, the place where we learn practical tools based on scientific research towards improving ourselves, living life to its fullest, and contributing to the best of our abilities to the world around us. I am Dr. Maria Grajdian, and I am a professor of media studies and anthropology at Hiroshima University. In my free time, I am doing my best to guide you in building up a life of contentment, joy, and fulfillment while applying lessons learned in school to overcome the difficulties, challenges, and insecurities of the real world. In today's video, I share my thoughts on the concept of family and what it means in late modernity, while focusing on details which transcend classical statements highlighting immediate superficial data and results. I believe it is important to ask ourselves fundamental questions related to the times we are living in and to the world we are going to pass on to our children and to future generations beneath ideological constraints or political-economical concerns. In this video, I start with the definition of family as nuclear family and as extended family, and some of the characteristics of family such as contractual dimensions, commitment, intergenerational contract and lineage, children, parents, love, sexuality, social contract, and then I ponder on the perils of forgetting or ignoring the lessons of history with specific focus on recent developments. And now, first things first, that is two important disclaimers. The first disclaimer serves to strongly emphasize the fact that this YouTube channel, The School of Love, is not part of my educational and research activities at Hiroshima University. It is nonetheless part of my privilege, joy, and sense of duty to propagate and implement knowledge, information, as well as motivation and inspiration outside the limited framework of academic endeavors. Together, we can build up a better tomorrow for as many of us as possible. The second disclaimer relates to the fact that I am a trained musician and musicologist, not a psychologist, therapist, or counselor. The ideas I am sharing in my videos reflect my deep-going preoccupation with life, my own life and other people's lives, and express the results of my experiences, research, and for better or for worse, failures, and my recovery from those failures, recovery which is continuously ongoing. The ideas expressed in the videos on this channel named The School of Love cannot and may not and must not replace the consultation with specialists in whichever areas of your life you might have questions or you might struggle with. If you are new to this channel, at this moment I would like to ask you to please consider subscribing, sharing, liking, commenting. Thank you very, very much. This helps us not only with that mysterious algorithm which seems to dominate the YouTube galaxy, but also with contributing to the expansion of the community of humans doing their best to impact positively the world and those around them by discovering their authentic selves and living life wholeheartedly. Thanks again. And now back to today's topic, which is family and my thoughts on family. So what is family? Family is the most powerful, the strictest social contract we know. So historically speaking and geographically speaking, it is the strongest social contract and the strongest contract altogether we know. So this means when someone enters in a marriage, and it is in marriage, it contains specific contractual agreements and obligations and clauses which must be respected, and family is considered the social structure, the social cell, the social foundational cell of the society. But it has known variations and diverse mutations throughout history, and depending on geographical area, even nowadays it appears in various ways. But for the sake of simplicity, I will refer mainly to the Western model of the family, which tends nowadays to be the prevailing model. So it's important to understand that the current model of nuclear family is a socio-economic and later on political construction of the post-Second World War II world. So what we know nowadays as nuclear family, so mother, father, husband, wife, and 2.3 children, is a model, is a construction imposed as such in the Western world since the end of the Second World War, which was 1945. It is not the rule, and it was not the rule throughout history. It is just another version of what we see now, consider nowadays family. So it's not the rule, and it wasn't the rule throughout history. It's just another model, and actually it is, as I said, a socio-economic and later on a political construction in order to regulate societies in the West or in Western influenced countries after the end of the Second World War in 1945. Prior to that, before 1945, people lived in extended households, which included more often than not all of those members of a specific community which shared the same kin or genetic material through birth or marriage, or who were adopted into the family, which happened much more often than we think. Now, and life expectancy was short, and infant mortality very high, and inbreeding and incestuous sexual relationships were rampant. Yeah? So it's very important to understand what family actually means and has been meaning throughout history. The advancement of modern social structures allowed for the emergence and development of bureaucratic structures, which then implicitly made possible a larger degree of clarity as to over individual formations. So the current family model, as we know it, the nuclear family model, is a model which emerged as soon as the bureaucratic overseeing of the society was made possible in modernity, and more particularly after the Second World War, so that the state had more insight into the intimate dimensions of the human beings. Up to that point, the state didn't care, and it is my personal theory that infant mortality was driven down because the state had more power over determining that little humans known as children also have a right to life of their own. Before 1945, I would say, but let's say until the end of the 19th century, in all what we call nowadays wealthy societies or late modern societies, children are actually very expendable. And very high infant mortality was also due to the fact that nobody really cared about children, and really only the fittest survived. So, and if a family had too many children, because the woman happened to be maybe very healthy and could bear many healthy children, some of them were actually killed, or this means killed through exposure. So they were just left somewhere in the field, and animals would eat it out, or it would die due to bad weather, right? So, but nowadays you cannot do that anymore, right? If you abandon your children, they will be hopefully rescued by someone or put in an orphanage, and the parents who abuse or neglect their children, they are punished by the state. So you go to jail for abusing your children. And my personal theory is that this is one of the reasons why infant mortality has gone down so dramatically. Of course, we have better medical supplies, better medical care, but this is one of the factors among many. And the reason why we have so better medical care for children as well, who are not so loud and not so vocal as elderly, is because the state increasingly recognized the value of children as future citizens, and because they recognize the value of having healthy, good, and numerous citizens for the future. And also it is very important to understand that family and grounding a new family was not based on love. It was a contract between two families, two countries, two feudal, to structures, to um, neighborhoods, neighborhood domains, and so on. It wasn't love marriage or romantic marriage, which is a social construction of the 19th century, the second half of 19th century, under the influence of the romantic movement, which praised this soul connection of people and was very keen on on promoting this the emotionality of being human. But prior to that, prior to the mid 19th century, marriage always occurred out of political or economic interests, or out of both. So well, romantic marriage or marriage back then was an attribute or a privilege of the upper class or of the intellectuals, by no means of 99.99% of the population, which were farmers. And furthermore, so it is important that the nuclear family nowadays, it's on one hand is based on love, on emotions, on this meeting one's soulmate, whatever it might mean. And but back then, when this happened, when this took off, it happened between individuals. So it became a fashion, an ideal in an era in which humans lived 20 to 25 years in average. So boys died, or young men died in wars or labor accidents, while girls died or young women died in childbirth or the consequence of childbirth, such as bleeding, infections, or extreme weakness. So we still didn't have this idea that people will live together in a family, in a nuclear family, for decades. It didn't exist. People would get married for a couple of months, or maybe a couple of years in best case scenario. It was also that, well, there was a lot of promiscuity, as I said, a lot of promiscuity both within the extended household and outside the extended household. And men, there was a lot of inbreeding and incest, and a lot of what we would say now, what we know nowadays, that it's unhealthy intra-household interactions. And nowadays, when we live much longer lives, when within 2 generations, essentially average life expectancy have essentially tripled or even quadrupled, it is both unrealistic and cruel to a certain degree to require on a mass scale that two people fall in love, and stay in love and stay committed to each other for decades while raising children and shaping the communities around them and leading productive, harmonious lives. This is just impossible. This was not part of the initial movement, of the initial idea, of initial structure, of initial idea in itself. And nowadays we have this combination of families which are supposed to stick together for decades. Two people who have never met before the age of, I don't know, but there's exceptions, but two people who never met before the age of 20, 25 now or later, where their personalities and characters are already formed, and now they have to stick together for the rest of their lives, which might last decades, and then even create happy children and so on. This is just impossible. It was never part of any sort of vision of what family might mean. So nowadays, the way I see the evolution of society is that serial monogamy, so this kind of people meet and then separate and then find different partners, which used to be the norm for wealthy male members of the society throughout the centuries and millennia. So a wealthy man would marry, a wealthy woman, but she would die soon enough in childbirth or the consequence of childbirth, and then he would remarry. And the second one, of course, would die again, a third and fourth, and so on. This is serial monogamy. But because nowadays women live longer lives as well, they will do the same. And being against and talking about promiscuity, sexual promiscuity towards women, it will still last maybe a couple of years, but this is the end. And the solution is not to resist it. Particularly, I see in particularly conservative circles that many men complain about this explosive sexual promiscuity of women. And I'm thinking, this is just the way things evolved when we live such long lives. You cannot accept promiscuity on the side of men, but not on the side of women. This just don't work. Before that, when because wealthy men, they didn't go to war, and they would pay and send someone else, and they would not work like physical labor. That's why they lived actually long lives. We see all these intellectuals, all these writers, all these philosophers. So the upper class, those who could afford to sit in their homes and write and become so mentally and emotionally enlightened, that's why they live such long lives. But women, like medical conditions for childbirth and women's health were the same for everyone. Maybe a rich lady would have access to better doctors, and to, like, she wouldn't live in such in misery and poverty. But still, when problems occurred, and they did occur, as they do nowadays as well, there was no solution to that. So this serial monogamy is set to become the alternative, the norm for both women and women. While it might still take a while until this alternative existential trajectory will prevail, it is nonetheless important to acknowledge that its emergence and propagation on a larger scale is inevitable. It's a question of when and how society will adapt to this new fashion of intergender relationships, or sexual relationships, or sexual reality. It's not a question of when. Of if it will happen or it is happening. It's rather a question of when and how. Again, because in the past, families, parents, or humans used to die younger. There was no question of parents holding on to their children. There were some exceptions, of course, but they were very seldom. Also, very seldom, very rare. And we do not really have track of that, or documents about that phenomenon, which would, before, in pre-modernity or before bureaucracy became a thing in late 19th, so early 20th century. We have the novels, we have literature, and there are hardly any accounts of this inability of parents to let go of their children, which means it might have existed, but it wasn't very prevalent. Nowadays, we have this problem that in these nuclear families, in which parents essentially only rely on each other, and we know from data that in most cases, in cases of those, 40% which do not get divorced, an overwhelming part, over 80%, are actually dysfunctional. They are dysfunctional within themselves, so they rely on their children for some sort of emotional and mental happiness or fulfillment. So parents don't let go of their children, and this is something we have to do. We have to learn nowadays, is that parents must learn to let go of their children, so that the younger generation can live its own life free from the expectations and pressures and projections of older generation. In my opinion, from how I see the world, the main reason for the increasing toxicity of the current global world is the iron grip older generation have over younger generations, the relentless struggle for power between generations, which transcends by far the earlier generational gap, and the inability of older generations to accept their own sunset, which is normal, but they cannot. Yeah? So, and the sooner the older generation accepts, or learn to accept with dignity and courage, that they are passé, the better will be for current and future generations. So we have throughout the entire world, both the so-called wealthy world and the developing world, we have these gerontocracies, so which are essentially old people, particularly so 80-90% men, but also women. So old people who are governing the world and individual countries, and they take decisions, and which are very beneficial to them and very detrimental long term. But they don't care about the long term, because those consequences will happen in the future, in which they're not there anymore to suffer the consequences. And they're also not really concerned about their own children and grandchildren, because they think their children and grandchildren are actually wealthy enough and belong to a stratum of the society which will not be affected by such by those consequences. So it is really concerning, to say the least. It is really concerning to see how older generations are simply controlling the world and taking decisions for the future which are very negative, with very negative consequences, and totally not caring about that future. And again, another thing we have to learn as we grow older and as we have longer life expectancies is that children do not belong to us, to parents. And in these nuclear families, which are the norm, and or even in this multi-generational households, children are seen as the future caregivers for parents and grandparents, which is not true. So children are their own selves, and parents, particularly mothers, but also grandmothers, for instance, but mothers are a channel through which children have come into being, and they do not owe anything to anyone. The duty of parents and grandparents is to do their best for current and future welfare of the children, so that these can lead independent lives at some point, and not to raise them in the spirit of taking care of them when they're old and frail. This is not the case. This is so toxic, and I see it again and again around me. And I try to talk to those parents and grandparents, and really it simply doesn't come through. They see their children as investments in the future. Yes, it's for their future, for the future of the children, not for your own future. And the next one is even worse. Parents are not their children's best friends. And this is not the case, because children need their friends. Children need to socialize with their peers, to have this exchange with their own generation, not with the older generation. Because when parents turn their own children into their best friends, or when parents do their best to become their children's best friends, this is a very toxic vision of child rearing, which essentially robs the child of its innocence and sense of awe, and puts it in a position of power and control equal to that of the parent, which is actually not equal, but it's about perception. And it doesn't need this. This actually is almost parentification, or maybe it is parentification, or the essence of parentification, in which children become equal to parents, although they do not have the strength, the power, the experience, and also probably the willingness to do so. And at the end, two quotes, one from Albert Schweitzer, the greatest, one of the biggest, one of the most important educators of the 20th century. So children need love and role models. My addition would be children need healthy role models, and of course a lot of love. And secondly, from the German writer, philosopher, and poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, which says that as parents we must give our children roots and wings. It is our duty as part of the family, as the older part of the family, to love and respect children, so as member of our families, and to respect them in their budding uniqueness, and to encourage them to live their own lives, to discover their potential, to reach that potential, and then to expand it, to challenge it, to expand it towards its unlimited potentialities. So nuclear family, as it is evolving nowadays, it has become a very toxic phenomenon. Unfortunately, and it seems that nothing can really challenge that situation. In my opinion, the way I see it, not in my opinion, in the way I see it, we really need to challenge this transformation of family into a cage, into a prison for children, and allow children to become who they are meant to be, like beautiful souls for tomorrow, and to contribute to the best of our abilities to them becoming their best selves, and able to live independently and autonomously in a world in which maybe we won't be part of anymore. And this is perfectly fine. It is perfectly fine. Still, we have this duty. I hope the insights in this video help you further your vision about what family is, what the relationship between parents and children the duty of parents and grandparents. And as always, thank you for allowing me to share these thoughts with you, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you here very soon again. Love and peace to you all.